Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Grace Sammon is an entrepreneur, educator, speaker and author. She has started and managed 2 for-profit and 2 not-for-profit companies, and she has travelled to 35 states in America and to 8 countries overseas. Recognised in Who's Who in Education and Who's Who in Literature, Grace is utilising skills built up over the decades as she reinvents herself with her award-winning 4th book and debut novel, The Eaves, as well as with a return to one of her early loves, radio. The Eaves is an intergenerational story about lives lived well and lives in transition. It is a novel that challenges us to ask who we want to be in the world, regardless of our age. Grace brings that quest for a good story and a drive to keep contributing to her new radio show, The Storytellers. Each episode captures the stories of authors and others who leave their mark on the world through the art of story. Grace is a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, is director of membership for one of the fastest growing Facebook groups, Bookish Road Trip, and a contributing moderator of The Right Review. She is currently working on several anthologies and sketching out her new novel. So let's have a chat with Grace and find out more about The Eaves, her debut novel, The Storytellers, her radio show, and what she is working on next. Well, Grace, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm thrilled to be speaking to you.
Emma, I am thrilled to be with you. I love popping over across the pond to Scotland today.
I always kind of start my interviews by asking my guests, what was your journey to fiction?
Well, it was actually a long journey, even though I always wrote and always enjoyed writing. My first 3 books are all in the area of education. So switching to being a fiction writer was quite honestly a surprise. I had been traveling 200 days a year on my educational consulting job, and that was getting exhausting. And my mom had died, my father was ill, my children were grown, and I thought, who am I in this story of life anymore? And as I began to wrestle with that, I began to fantasize about what a really perplexed character and a complex character who was facing those same issues might feel like, look like, and wrestle with which issues. So I created The Eaves, and all of a sudden I was a novelist.
That's nice. I love that just this inspiration came and that it sort of came from your own chapter of life and the thoughts that you're having about, okay, where I'm at a crossroads here, how does this impact me and where am I going to go from here? That's quite often how story ideas come to me as well.
Well, I was going to say, as an author, we tend to write the book we want to read. And there was just no other book out there. And that is a whole nother thing. You have such a wonderful world into the whole world of publishing and writing. You know that that whole journey is made more difficult to get published, especially if you don't have another book that you can say to a potential agent, my book is like that book. Mm-hmm. So in creating and writing the book that I wanted to read, it was then also a publishing challenge, if you will. But yes, very much from my own experience. And I think readers feel that, you know, they feel when an author is really connected to their story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you've mentioned The Eves. It's your debut novel. And it is a beautiful story. As I said before we started recording, I recently read it. And it's all about Jessica, who is telling the stories of women that she comes into contact with on a sustainable farm. But I wonder if you could give us a little more detail into that and what the story is about.
Thank you. So Jessica is basically a hot mess. She's in her late 50s. She's lost her connection to her children. She's basically given up on her career, her looks. She hasn't given up on her vodka, and she has not given up on her lies that help her get through every day. And she has a very, very bossy friend named Sonia. And I hope everybody listening has a very, very bossy friend, because Sonia says to her, you will stop hiding. You are hiding from the world. You are not making your mark on the world. And I have this group of women that I want you to meet. I want you to catalog their stories. And Jessica wants none of it, but realizes she is lost enough, and she doesn't want to disappoint Sonia. So she starts writing the oral histories of these women. And the youngest character is 15, and the oldest one is 94. And she starts writing the characters of these older women. And as she does, everybody's story changes.
Mm. Yes, and particularly Jessica's, it felt like, as well. And it's one of the things I really enjoyed about your writing was how after certain kind of deep conversations she has with other people about their lives, she would have a realization about her own life. And you did it very subtly about, you know, for example, you mentioned the vodka. I remember, just as an example, after a conversation she'd had with somebody, she decided not to finish that mug of vodka that was beside her and poured it down the sink. And I thought just little things like that gave us a clue into how her slowly but surely she was evolving and changing and coming out of this cave that she'd been hiding in on her own. I'm intrigued too about the love interest in her story, whose name for the moment has just popped out of my head.
Which character?
The man in her life.
Oh, Roy Gillis.
Roy, yes. What was the inspiration behind Roy, and why was it important to give her that kind of companionship?
Roy is an interesting character. One of the things that readers and reviewers say about the book in general is that if you love a character-driven novel, or if you love a place-driven novel, you will love The Eves, because the characters are so well developed, and I love that as an author. Truth be told, however, Roy Gillis is word for word my husband. There is no wonderful creativity about how I cast Roy. And it was important for me to have Jessica meet Roy, fall in love with Roy, because her transformation, as you alluded to, is very complete. You know, she's such a hot mess, as I mentioned. She's broken in so many ways. And I wanted her to heal in as many ways as possible. And that, for me, was very realistic. I'm married to my Roy Gillis only 9 years, so it's relatively new for me. And I wanted to also address the idea of love at a later age, mm-hmm. and intimacy at a later age. our bodies, that was something that was very important for me to write about. My body at 68, unfortunately or fortunately, is not the same body I had when I was younger, a young mom, even 10 years ago. It's amazing how there seems to be this little meter after which you pass. It's like the point of no return. You realize you're never going to have that flat stomach again. And coming to terms with that, and also being able to talk about that candidly, was important to me. So there is a love scene between Jessica and Roy. And I think it probably should have happened about 5 chapters before it did, but I couldn't figure out how to write about it. I was like, oh, no. I don't want any touching.
It's a tricky, it is a tricky sort of scene to navigate, doing a love scene, and how subtle you want to be and how not, and what will readers like and what will they not. It is a fine balance, I think, but I think you did it very well.
Thank you.
I also wondered, I was sort of thinking about now that I know that Roy is your husband, I need to think about what I say. But one of the things I wondered about the two of them is because he's very steady, stable, and she's not. And I wondered if, she adds a bit of excitement to his life that he doesn't have. He's not that type of character. So she gives him that kind of, a bit of a kick, a bit of excitement.
I think that's true in reality and in the book. In my reality and in the book.
Good. Well, I wonder about this reality then. So Jessica she's far from perfect, as we've alluded to, and could come across as, some people might not like her. And I wonder how were you worried about that people might not like her drinking, that people might not like that sort of slightly more prickly or slightly more outspoken side of a character? Was that something you worried about when you wrote about her?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because in your own writing, your own characters aren't always, the person you want to embrace right away. And I think that that's a risky thing sometimes to do for an author, but I also think it's a very real thing. In truth, I don't think I worried about it at any point, because even though Jessica is not my favorite character, she is very humanly flawed. And I thought readers would be able to see she's flawed. She's not a bad person by any means. But I use a beta group of readers always to test the waters, to help me with where plots should go, just to give me a feedback on the overall process, if you will. I also use beta readers in a very selfish way, in that if I'm not done my piece, a beta reader will say, give me the next chapter. And that's very motivating to me. It's egotistical. And it's like, oh, they want the next chapter. So that is a piece that I consider critical to any writer, to have a beta group. But in my beta group, I had at least 3 people who said, she is so unlikable, you will never get published. One person said, she's a liar. I won't even finish this book. She is a liar.
Oh.
And so that gave me pause to really rethink her. I don't think I changed her. I may have changed some of the language around her. There's a wonderful expression that the wonderful author Lainey Cameron uses, and I think it's called pet the cat. So if you have a bad character who's doing bad things, someplace along the line he has to pick up a cat and pet the cat and feed the cat, and then all of a sudden he becomes likable. So I love that Lainey taught me that piece. So I don't think I did change her considerably, but putting her out there in the world as flawed, once I knew that people would think she was very flawed, was a cause for concern.
Certainly, the women that I write about are often start out very imperfect, and I have to admit, it is something that I do worry about, whether people will like her and want to carry on. But for some reason, she still, I keep right. She comes out the way she comes out, and that's that's the way it goes.
Well, and too, and people who are not writers will not necessarily resonate with this, but the characters take on a life of their own. And just like I couldn't ask you to behave differently after we finished today, you are a real entity and our characters are real entities. And when they act out of character, readers also pick that up. They'll say, oh, Jessica would have never done that, or Roy would have never done that. You mentioned Roy is very, very steady. I can't imagine a point where Roy would have yelled at Jessica for anything, because the readers would have said, Roy would have never done that.
Yes. Now, you mentioned just before about talking about the road to publication. And I wonder would you be happy to share a little bit about that journey with us, and how you went from having your finished manuscript to finding your publisher?
That's a wonderful journey, and I love to be asked that question. So my very, very first book in education was self-published. Made me, quite honestly, a good bit of money. But I really struggled with that self-publishing concept, particularly in the area of education, because I wanted to be vetted. I wanted to have that juried process, if you will. So my second book was published by Corwin Press, as was my third book. And those are incredibly, I thought, would be very difficult road to publication, because, as I said, they have superintendents and deans of universities and so many people who vet it and check the data and do a myriad of things to make sure that the volume is valid, if you will. I sent out 16 letters to various publishing houses for my first book in education. And I think I had 14 responses, or it was a ridiculous response rate, and very gratifying as well. In the world of being a novelist, it's a very, very different route. First of all, you don't, as many of your listeners will know, don't ever send it directly to a publishing house. You send it to an agent. You have a 1% chance of getting an agent. You don't even have a very good chance of hearing back from an agent, whether they want it or not. So there are some other routes you can go without an agent, and you can just Google those, publishing houses that submit without an agent. And I could have gone that way. My brother, Rick Sammon, has written 46 books, mostly in the area of photography. The first, I think, 39 of them were traditionally published, which is now the word I use. His 40th one was independently published. And as I was searching around for agents, he said, this is ridiculous. You're wasting too much time. Become an independent published person. And I didn't understand the subtle switch that has happened, in my mind anyway, between traditional publishing and indie publishing. I now even separate out self-publishing as differently, because the indie world, even though we are technically self-published, if you will, we tend to have book creators. As you know, I listened to a fabulous podcast on your show about how do we do this and get such a professional product together. Mm-hmm. And that was a very brilliant show on your part, by the way. And I think that I worked very closely with a company called Writing Nights and a man named Chad Robertson, who is a brilliant editor and an absolutely fabulous book developer. So I started working with him, and he did all of the things that authors need to do if they're going to go that self-publishing route, which I now call indie route. Nobody says to Robert Redford's Independent Film Festival, oh, those are just indie films. Those are real, valid films. Yeah. So making that mental switch was important. But then there was also a trick, because, and this was the trick, the traditional self-published or indie author gets their ISBN number, and it goes up on their Kindle version and their Amazon and their usually Barnes and Noble. And there may be different vehicles to the listeners that are listening to your show as well. But those then cannot be carried in bookstores, because bookstores can't afford to get them at those rates, and they're not returnable, and et cetera. Mm. So I worked closely with Chad Robertson, and we reissued the Eves under Upstream Press. And I had a different ISBN, and now it can be in bookstores. Bookstores may or may not carry it, but they can carry it. They can carry it for a profit. People can go to independent bookstores, which I think are so important in our culture, and say, could you order me a copy of the Eves under this ISBN? So the learning curve and the journey to that type of publishing was also immense.
Mm-hmm. It shows just how vast the publishing world is, even for us, humble indies, but also how it's evolving. I listen a lot to Joanna Penn and Jay Thorne, who were in the indie space back when it first started, and listening to what the experiences they had 10 years ago compared to how it is now, and that even on Amazon, you can publish a hardback, for example. It's just evolving and changing all the time. And it's one of the exciting things about it. And even that move kind of towards the more hybrid model, where you get the best of both worlds. An author can retain a lot of their independence, but they still get the benefit, say, of having a publishing house advise them, guide them, help them with the technical side. So it's wonderful how it's evolving. Very exciting.
Very exciting, and also very quickly evolving. I would tell you, almost nobody asks me who's published my book. It never happens. And I think I've done 56 interviews perhaps on the book. I've done various guest appearances, if you will, at retirement communities and libraries, and nobody ever says, well, are you published by Random House? They just don't care anymore. What they want is accessibility to good stories.
Good stories, so key. Now, talking of stories, you have your radio show called The Storytellers. So I would love for you to tell us about it.
This is a real gift to me to have this radio show. As you know, because you were kind enough to read The Eves, it's a story about never being done, regardless of your age. So the old ladies transform and many things happen to them. Jessica transforms and many things happen to them. And I think if I'm really honest with myself, deep down, I thought that in writing the book, I was done. I had finished the book, that it got it out in the world, and I thought I was done. And the surprise to me at 68 is that I'm not done. And that has mentioned or emerged in so many different ways. Certainly the way my social media has taken off, the opportunity to speak with you in Scotland today, but also with the radio show. I had the great gift of being interviewed by a woman named Dr. Gail Carson, and she wanted to talk to me on her show, Spunky Old Broad. And the reason for that was because she loved the idea that I was writing about older women, and she was 83 at the time. So she interviewed me on her show. We talked partly about entrepreneurism and publishing, and we talked a lot about the story. And she called me about 2 weeks later and she said, I loved our episode. I want to give you your own radio show. Whatever you want to talk about, I want you to have your own radio show. And I said, oh, I can't do that. I'm done. And she just laughed at me and said, no, you're not done. Remember, you just wrote that book. So she and I spoke, and she offered me a radio show on her station. And I did it. I think I'm into episode 13 now. And I think 13 launched yesterday. And it was just such a gift of her seeing something in me that I did not see in myself. And that's also a theme in the book. And I think for so many of us, and for so many of us as women, we don't see ourselves as others see us. So having Gail give me the show, if you will, was a huge gift. She was supposed to be guest number 6 on the show, and she literally passed away the day before we were taped.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
It was really sad and shocking, and I'm so blessed that I got to meet her for a minute of my life. She was like 4'3" and had more energy at 83 than I will ever have.
So it sounds like you're enjoying doing the Storytellers.
I am, in very surprising ways. I enjoyed being on both sides of the microphone, which is a surprise to me. I love putting together the puzzle of what a good interview looks like. I love doing the research. I like finding the quirky things out about my guests. And I like the development of a different kind of conversation too. And you're on both sides of the microphone as well. So it's just a joy. I'm very, very surprised. I love that people resonate with it. So basically, we focus on authors and others who leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I've done mostly authors, but I interviewed this amazing newscaster the other day who was with President George Bush when he learned of the terrorist attacks.
Wow.
She was a follower. She followed as a very young reporter Martin Luther King and his wife, and went to the house as they were getting the news because they had become friends that he had been murdered. So it's all of our stories, because I think we all have a story to tell.
Oh gosh, fascinating. I'm just going to change tack a little bit, and I wanted to chat to you a little bit about the Women's Fiction Writers Association. You're a member, and I've recently become a member because I did want to connect with women who are writing the same kinds of stories as me about women's lives. And I wonder, do you feel that it is important to build that kind of community, writing author community, and maybe to have that kind of network around you?
I think it's essential. I'm a relatively new member to WFWA, myself, the Women's Fiction Writers Association. It is a remarkable organization that I know I need to get more involved in. I haven't found the bandwidth in my time between some of the author things and getting the storytellers up and running. But they have a wonderful weekly newsletter where they talk about volunteer activities. They celebrate certain authors. So it's a platform to get your feet wet in if you'd like. They do a monthly podcast. They post questions. So if you go to their Facebook page, you'll frequently see an author post something that says, my character's a little bit unlikable. Is that a risk? What do you think about that? And you can kind of test the waters that way, because it's such a supportive community. So I'm so glad that you joined WFWA. And I think that network of authors has been such a support to me in this work in the last 17 months, 16 months, because we become friends. And that's something I, especially at my age, I really kind of poo-pooed the whole social networking that you create real friends. I was like, no, real friends are real people in real life that you can sit down and have dinner with. And the idea that I can call up now 30, 40 authors if I needed to and say, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm doing a Facebook Live, would you hop on with me, is amazing. And we're very honest and supportive group to each other. And there are just a couple of people who really stand out. I already mentioned Lainey Cameron. She's somebody who's won like 10 awards on her book, The Exit Strategy. With her book, she just won, I can't remember what her 10th award was.
I think it was her 11th award, wasn't it? It was just a crazy number.
It could have been a crazy number. It's hard to keep up, but she immediately posted and said, and congratulations to everybody else who was a runner-up, a finalist, whatever. She's just amazing that way. Julie Cantrell is similar. She was doing a workshop this week. I don't know if you saw her social media post, but she was doing this workshop, and Sharon Duquette, who's another wonderful author, was running to it and literally face planted on her way and very horribly messed up her face. And Julie Cantrell hopped on her social media, showed a picture of Sharon Duquette and said, we need to support this woman. Look at, here she was coming to my workshop, lifting me up. So let's everybody go over to her page and like her and follow her and send her a note of congratulations. And those are the two standouts in my mind. But the opportunity to lift people up and share and support is just amazing.
It is. And I hear so much more than I used to about the benefits of community, that more people are looking for community, and not just a big giant Facebook group where there's thousands and thousands, but actually a specific community where there's joint interest and that support and lifting people up, as you mentioned. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that with us.
Of course.
So I'm conscious of time, but before we go, I'd really love to know, what are you working on at the moment? Are you working on novel number 2?
I would love to tell you that's a true story. I was so happy to talk to a fellow author, another great reason to have fellow authors. We're both working on our second novel. And I just asked her the other day, said, how many pages have you actually written? She said 14. And I said, oh, I'm so happy. I think I've got 3. So I have 3 novels. At the back of the eaves, I talk about writing 1. I have 3 novels in my head, but I'm doing a lot more short story, not article writing. I can't even call them short stories. I'm doing a lot of short, independent article writing at the moment. I hope I have another book in me, because truly, I'm never as happy as when I'm sitting there and something forms in my head, and sometimes it trickles down into my fingers and onto a keyboard and then onto a screen. That is magic to me. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how we as humans do that. So I have 3 maybe in my head, and I hope they turn into real books.
Oh, me too. I'll be looking out for those. Yes.
Thank
So
you.
if any of our listeners would like to find out more about you, or more about the Eaves, where can they do that?
Probably the easiest way to find me is on gracesammon.net. And my name is spelled not like the fish. It's Sammon. So gracesammon.net. And there you can find all the Storyteller episodes are loaded. You'll find biographies. There's lots of extras. There's music that inspired the Eaves. And there's some wonderful pieces of music up there. There's recipes, there's questions, there's book club guide. So lots of things available on gracesammon.net. They can always email me, and they can email me at gracesammon.net, or, the ever-present Facebook. I'm at Grace Sammon, just my name. I also have an author page, but most authors aren't on their author page as much as they are on their personal page. So they can direct message me on Grace Sammon, and over on Instagram, I'm at Grace Sammon Writes, as in Grace Sammon Writes Books.
Oh, perfect. I will make sure that I link to each of those in the show notes. That's wonderful. Well, Grace, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Emma, a pleasure anytime. A real honor.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.